What's going on, guys? It's Brandon back here today for another season video. Let me turn my volume up. But 2012-13, the last year of what I'd call my childhood era, as the last year of 6 divisions, last year of Winnipeg in the East, the last time there's been a lockout, 48-game schedule on the board. Overall, it's an end of an era, to say the least. Before the season even kicks off, there's a lockout, and the season gets shortened to 48 games. Lockout goes a lot better than the 2004-05 one, however, the players still lose, and revenues go down for the players. Once again, I believe they go from 57 to 50, if anything. I think it's now 50-50 between the owners and the players. So players lose out again, but at least we got a season this time. I remember being this kid and waiting for hockey to come back and hoping it would, and luckily it did. But there were compliance buyouts. So, for compliance buyouts, I have them all written down. You have Komisarek, Mikhail Gabrovsky, Keith Ballard, Ville Lano, Christian Ehrhoff, Shane O'Brien, Steve Montador, Rostislav Olej. We talked about him in the last video. Aaron Rome, Carlo Koliakovo, Jordan Tutu, Eric Belanger, Martin Havlat, Nick Schultz, David Booth, Ilya Brzgalov, Danny Briere, Brad Richards, Wade Redden, Rick DiPietro, that's why he's Rick DiPietro days until 2029, Anton Volchenkov, Johan Hedberg, Thomas Cabriolet, Scott Gomez, Tom Gilbert, Ed Jovanovski, Vinny LeCave, Ryan Malone, and that's all the compliance buyouts, just like 2005 with the restructuring of the cap and all that. I believe the cap went up to $70.2 million during this season. So, overall, we're getting closer and closer to modern era, 11 years off. So, to end off this era of the NHL, with Detroit and Columbus also still on the West for the last time, Chicago, in the 48-game season, dominates. Absolute domination until the end of the season when they fall apart. 36-7-5 with 77 points. Oh, by the way, in their first half of the season, exact half, 24 games, they went 21-0-3. They couldn't lose. And then they go into Colorado one night and lose. And if you look at Colorado, second worst team in the league, because the Hawks did that. They lost to the bottom teams in the league. They got killed by Edmonton. They lose to Colorado when they were bad. Florida just seemed to always kick their ass. Carolina was never a good place. And Phoenix. Those places in Dallas, there were some good games in Dallas, but I remember a 5-0 game where my dad didn't even want to talk about it because I didn't stay up for that game that night. So 36-7-5 record for Chicago. St. Louis follows at 29-17-2 at 60 points, and then you have Detroit 24-16-8 with 56 points as I drop my eraser. Columbus out of the playoffs, but getting better. Columbus was getting better, and unfortunately they missed the playoffs on a tiebreaker with Minnesota. Same amount of points, 55, 24-17-7, but they would be back in the playoffs. In the East, they never ended up winning a game in the Western Conference. Nashville bottoms out of the playoffs at 16-23-9, 41 points there. Anaheim's back in the playoffs. Forgot to do my markings. 30-12-6 with 66 points. I know we usually go to the Northwest, but we're going to go Pacific today first. LA 27-16-5, 59 points. Those are your defending champions. San Jose 25-16-7, 57 points. Phoenix just misses the playoffs at 22-22-4, and they're not going to make the playoffs for a while, so don't count on it. Dallas 22-22-4, 48 points for them. Vancouver wins their division again somehow, 26-15-7 with 59 points. It's because their division sucks. Let's be honest here. Their division sucked. So Vancouver with 59 points. Minnesota back in the playoffs, 26-19-3 is the 8th seed, 55 points. Edmonton 19-22-7 at 45 points, getting better with the 3 first overall picks that they had. Calgary 19-25-4, 42 points. Colorado 16-12-7 with 39 points. So, Colorado, they end up winning the draft lottery. They get Nathan McKinnon out of that. So, overall, I think Colorado's pretty happy with how this season went. Although Minnesota's back in the playoffs, Anaheim's back in, Arizona and Nashville are out, or Phoenix and Nashville. In the East, Pittsburgh is the only rival to Chicago, 36-12-0 with 72 points. And this was the year we thought we were getting Chicago and Pittsburgh in the final, the two best teams in the league that people knew of. While you had Chicago and LA in the West, it was Pittsburgh and Boston in the East. And the Final Four reflects that, because when we get to the Final Four, it's the last four Cup winners. The Rangers at 26-18-4, 56 points. The Islanders finally make it back to the playoffs as the 8th seed, 24-17-7 at 55 points. Philadelphia, although a winning record, falls out of the playoffs at 23-22-3, 49 points. And we're going to see them back and forth every single year, as I mentioned in the previous video. New Jersey, though, is out permanently for a while, 19-19-10 with 48 points. And it only goes down from here. Montreal, after finishing last in the East and finishing 7th or 8th seed normally from 2009, 2010, 2011, last in the East, they finished first in the Northeast because this is the Carey Price era. Carey Price this season comes into his own and becomes that full legendary goaltender that Montreal knows and loves. 29-14-5, 63 points. Boston, 28-14-6 with 62 points. Toronto is also back in the playoffs for the first time since 2004, after those years of barely missing it in the mid-2000s. Finally back, although even Leafs fans debate whether they should have even been close to the playoffs that year. 26-17-5, 57 points. Ottawa bringing up the rear at 25-17-6, 56 points. So you got four teams in the Northeast in the playoffs. And Buffalo, of course, 21-21-6, 48 points. You know the drill. They missed the playoffs. Only team in the Southeast that makes it before the removal of the Southeast Division is Washington. 27-18-3, 57 points, which is equivalent to Toronto. But yet Washington will get the third seed, even though Toronto in reality is the fourth best team in the East somehow. Or equal to, yeah, I would say they're, because they had more, no, Washington had more wins, but Washington also had more losses, so Winnipeg last year in the East, 24-21-3, 51 points and out of the playoffs, but getting better. And Winnipeg progressively gets better until they do, and then they don't, and then they do again, and it's really up and down with them. Carolina, 19-25-4, 42 points, in a truly atrocious Southeast Division. The bottom three teams in the three of the bottom four teams in the league were from the Southeast Division. It went Florida, Colorado, Tampa, to Carolina in terms of the ratings and the standings from bottom to top. Tampa falls. No, they didn't fall out of the playoffs. 18-26-4, 40 points. With the two, you could argue, best players in the league at the time. St. Louis and Stamkos are putting up all the points in the world, and yet this team just can't win games. Florida, 15-27-6, 36 points. They are the last. They finished last in the league. They don't get their first overall pick this year, but after winning the division last year, they completely bottom out. Playoffs. Number one seeded Chicago. Oh, I forgot to mention they won the President's Trophy, so there you go. The last team to win the Stanley Cup while winning the President's Trophy. So number one seeded Chicago versus number 8 seeded Minnesota. Chicago dispatches them at 5. When we came up against Minnesota, I had no fear. That was a series where we got this. It's Minnesota. And that's kind of how I felt throughout 2013 through 2015. I've talked about this before. I'm not sure if I've talked about it in a video, but I've talked about it in, comment sections of videos. Minnesota never scared me. I knew once we got put up against Minnesota, we were winning that series. Number 2 seeded Anaheim versus number 7 seeded Detroit. Detroit upsets Anaheim in 7, and Anaheim blew a 3-2 series lead. Bruce Boudreau was the coach, and his narrative continues of he can't win in Game 7, he can't win as the higher seed, and he chokes. Number 3 seeded Vancouver versus number 6 seeded San Jose. San Jose sweeps Vancouver in 4, and that era is officially over. Number 4 seeded St. Louis versus number 5 seeded LA. LA wins that series in 6 as they move on. In the East, number 1 seeded Pittsburgh versus number 8 seeded Islanders. Pittsburgh wins that series in 6. Number 2 seeded Montreal is ousted by number 7 seeded Ottawa in 5. Number 3 seeded Washington loses to the Rangers again in 7. Again. Boston at number 4 seed beats Toronto, the 5 seed in 7. Very memorably, as Boston was down, Boston had a 3-1 series lead. Toronto fights back. They're up 4-1 in Game 7. Boston climbs the mountain. They get to the top. They seal it, and they advance to the next round. Number 1 seeded Chicago faces a scare in round 2 against number 7 seeded Detroit. Detroit went up 3-1. Chicago won the first game. Detroit won the next 3, and I thought they were done. we all thought they were done. Chicago pulls it off. They win 3 straight, including a Game 7 overtime winner from Brent Seabrook, and they go to the conference final. Meanwhile, on the other side, LA, number 5, beats number 6 seeded San Jose in 7 as well. In the East, number 1 seeded Pittsburgh dismantles number 7 seeded Ottawa pretty quickly. And number 3 seeded Boston, or number 4 seeded Boston. That's number 4 seeded Boston. Why did I write 3? Number 4 seeded Boston dismantles number 6 seeded Rangers in 5 games. In the conference final, Chicago and LA, the last 2 Western Conference Cup winners. Chicago beats them in 5. And what was, honestly, Chicago controlled a good portion of that series, and my hate doesn't fully develop for LA. It was there. I mean, Keith got the slashing on Jeff Carter because Carter decided to push his glove down the ice. I'm not justifying what Keith did, but Duncan Keith, that's that guy you don't want to mess with. And then Boston beats Pittsburgh in 4, which shocked me completely. I remember being there. I thought it was Chicago and Pittsburgh in the final for sure. And number 4 seeded Boston, well, they beat Pittsburgh in 4. And it's a wonder if Pittsburgh's ever going to get back there. And this is a year where Crosby's finally back. Crosby's fully healthy. He's playing again. And you could see it in the awards because he wins an award this year. In the final, it's number 1 seeded Chicago versus number 4 seeded Boston. Game 1, I remember staying up for. 4-3 triple overtime victory off the stick of Andrew Shaw. Wow, what a game. And Game 2, I got worried because Boston wins that one 2-1 in overtime in Chicago. And then they go to Boston and they lose 2-0. Tuukka Rask, phenomenal in that game. Game 4 is probably my favorite game of the series. It's a 6-5 shootout, 6-5 overtime win. Guess who gets the OT winner? It's Brent Seabrook again. And series tied, going to Chicago, where Chicago wins Game 5, 3-1. They go to Game 6. Boston's up 2-1 with 2 minutes to go. With a minute 16 remaining, Brian Bickle ties it. 17 seconds later, Dave Bolin gets the winner, and the Hawks steal the Stanley Cup in Boston, winning that series in 6. Playoff scoring leaders, it's not close. David Krejci dominated the playoffs with 22 games played, 9 goals, 17 assists, 26 points. Patrick Kane wins the Conn Smythe, but 23 games, 9 goals, 10 assists, 19 points. Nathan Horton, 22 games played, 7 goals, 12 assists, 19 points. Milan Lucic with the exact same points totals, 7 goals, 12 assists, 19 points in 22 games. And then Brian Bickle really came out this season. He blossomed into what looked like a top 6 forward, and that's where he gets the massive deal from Bowman, 4 years by $4 million. Not a massive deal, but large deal for Bickle. And he'd have health problems that eventually would end his career. 23 games played for him, 9 goals, 8 assists, 17 points, and a fantastic run. I honestly thought Bickle should have won the Conn Smythe, and Kane even came out afterward and said Corey Crawford should have won the Conn Smythe, which I honestly would have been fine with, but I really don't think Kane played as big of a role in this playoffs as he did in 2010, nor as he did in 2015 either. And Taves, he wasn't even in the top 10 scorers for the playoffs. This was the year he kind of went under the radar. Honestly, 2015, I think he should have won Conn Smythe. Crawford, 16-7 with a .932 save percentage, a shutout, and a 1.84 goals against. Rask, with 3 shutouts, goes 14-8 with a .940 save percentage and a 1.88 goals against average. Very good goaltending on both sides. Crawford, this was probably his best playoff performance, although he was a little shaky against Detroit, it looked like. And there are Game 4 isn't a very great total for him. But overall, Crawford was pretty solid in net, and I thought he was going to be the goalie for a long time, and while he was, he didn't ever live up to what he did here again until 2016. He was pretty good. After that, though, 2020 is probably his next best performance. Award winners. Art Ross goes to Martin St. Louis, 48 games played, 17 goals, 43 assists, 60 points as the leading point scorer in the league at like 40 years old at this point. Masterton goes to Josh Harding of Minnesota, and I could not believe it did not go to Sidney Crosby, who came back from multiple concussions, almost a year and a half off from the game. And it goes, Josh Harding, don't get me wrong, I love Josh Harding. He was a good backup goaltender. And of course he comes in to replace Nicholas Backstrom, who gets hurt before Game 1, during warm-ups of Game 1 against Chicago. Calder goes to Jonathan Huberdeau of the Florida Panthers, who I have his jersey. Conn Smythe, Patrick Kane of Chicago. Selke goes to Jonathan Taves, who wins his for only Selke is with the member of the Chicago Blackhawks. Hart goes to Alexander Ovechkin of the Capitals. Adams goes to Paul McLean Jack Adams goes to Paul McLean of the Ottawa Senators. The Norris goes to P.K. Subban of the Montreal Canadiens. The Clancy goes to Patrice Bergeron of the Boston Bruins. The Lady Byng goes to Martin St. Louis of the Tampa Bay Lightning, also known as him and Datsuk's award, basically. The Lindsay goes to Sidney Crosby of the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Messier goes to Daniel Alfredson of Ottawa. That would be his last season in Ottawa. Alexander Ovechkin wins the Rocket with 32 goals in the 48 games. The Vezina goes to Sergei Bobrovsky, who we'll get to, 21, 11, and 6, 932 save percentage, and a 2.00 goals against average. For a goalie not to make the playoffs and still win the Vezina, as young as he was, remarkable. Jennings goes to Corey Crawford and Ray Emery of the Chicago Blackhawks. Shout out Corey Crawford, and rest in peace, Ray Emery. Emery was fantastic that season. Emery had an incredible record as the backup goaltender, and you could have put him at starter and he would have been perfectly good. First team All-Stars, Chris Kunitz takes the spot of James Neal as that one guy you're like, wait, he was a first team All-Star? Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, that's business as usual. Ryan Suter and P.K. Subban on the defense pair of the first team, and then Bobrovsky and net. Second team, Ovechkin. So this is what happened. Ovechkin kind of played both positions. He gets first team for right winger, second team for left winger. First time I think that was ever done. Incredible. Jonathan Toews down the middle, and Martin St. Louis on the right. Letang and Francois Beauchemin, surprisingly, on the second pair. Beauchemin and Suter are the surprises. Suter is a very good defenseman. He obviously got bought out of his second contract. But for Suter, this was his prime, and there's a reason he got that massive deal. And Lundqvist is in net for the second team goaltender. There was an all-rookie team on the Wikipedia page I used for researching this. So Saad, Huberdeau, and Gallagher were the forwards, I should say. Saad, member of the Blackhawks, Huberdeau on Florida, Gallagher at Montreal. Schultz, Brodin, that's Justin Schultz and Jonas Brodin. So Minnesota getting some guys in there. Justin Schultz. What team was he on at the time? Would that have been Edmonton? Anaheim? I don't remember. And Jake Allen in net. In terms of free agency, we'll start here. David Moss goes to Calgary. Joe Corvo goes to Carolina. Colby Armstrong to Montreal. Ray Whitney to Dallas. Adam Burge to San Jose. Tanner Glass goes to Pittsburgh after a year in Winnipeg. I forgot to mention that in the last video. Aaron Asham to the New York Rangers. Brandon Pruss to Montreal. Sheldon Brookbank to Chicago. Didn't play as big of a role as he did in 2014. Ponikarovsky goes to Winnipeg. Not for long. Peros goes to Florida. Yes, that George Peros. Sheldon Surrey finishes his career in Anaheim. P.A. Parito goes to Colorado. Chris Mason goes to Nashville because Steve Mason was in Columbus. Adrian Aucoin goes to Columbus. Sammy Salo to Tampa Bay. Michael Samuelson goes back to Detroit for what feels like the third time at this point. Jordan Tutu goes to Detroit as well. Jason Garrison to Vancouver. John Scott to Buffalo. Cam Barker, who I couldn't believe is still in the league, to Vancouver. If I haven't done a career video on him, I might do one. Ryan Perron, Anaheim. Yuri Hudler goes to Calgary to finish his career. Oli Jokinen to Winnipeg. Brad Boyce to the Islanders. Jaromir Jagr goes to Dallas. Taylor Pyatt, the New York Rangers. Zach Parise and Ryan Suter signed matching deals, 13-year deals, which got bought out by Bill Guerin, and those are going to be bought out for a long time. I think till 2029, I want to say. That's the last one. Steve Sullivan goes to Phoenix. El Montoya to Winnipeg. Matt Carl to Tampa Bay. Fedotenko to Philly. Wolski to Washington. Garrett Exelby to Boston. Aaron Rome to Dallas. Alexander Semin to Carolina. He never could rekindle the magic he had in Washington. Scott Hannon to Nashville. Michael Roosevelt to Chicago. Kolyakovo to Detroit. Dan Ellis to Carolina. He wasn't the goalie he was that Nashville had saves 5 years prior. Eric Fair to Washington. Jim Vandermeer to Vancouver. Mark Eden goes back to Pittsburgh. Radek Dvorak goes to Anaheim. That's Christian Dvorak's father, I believe. Kostopoulos goes to Pittsburgh. Rosehill to Anaheim. Reddins to St. Louis. Huskins to Detroit. Scott Gomez, after being a compliance buyout, goes to San Jose. And who does that say? Mike Knuble goes to Philadelphia. So that rounds out free agency. Not a lot of big names, but a lot of names. Trades. Some ones that to be regretted, to say the least here. June 26, 2012, Sergei Bobrovsky is traded to Columbus for a second and 2/4, going to Philadelphia. A moment of silence for the Philadelphia Flyers. June 22nd, 2012, Ribeiro is traded to Washington for Cody Eakin and a second going to Dallas. Ribeiro kind of replacing Semen's depth. Never rekindled his Dallas magic. June 22nd, 2012, Jordan Staal goes to Carolina to play with his brother for Brandon Sutter, Brian Dumoulin, who's now in Seattle, and a first-round pick going to Pittsburgh. June 23rd, 2012, James Van Riemsdyk is traded to Toronto 1-for-1 for Luke Schenn. It's definitely a strange trade. Luke Schenn, of course, at the time had very high, he was a high draft pick. Van Riemsdyk was a second overall pick. I would say Van Riemsdyk's definitely the better player. I mean, Schenn, he's a very good defenseman now, like for what he brings now at his age, but Toronto kind of wins that trade going away, to say the least. July 1st, 2012, Nick Foligno is traded to Columbus for Mark Mathot, going to Ottawa. In Columbus, you see, is doing this. They're bringing in young guys. While they traded out picks here, they're bringing in picks later on. They bring in guys like Nick Foligno to build around their next core. February 7th, 2013, Tim Thomas traded to the Islanders for a conditional second going to Boston. The reason I mention this is because I'm pretty sure Tim Thomas did not play for the Islanders. February 13th, 2013, Ponikarovsky is traded for the second straight year back to New Jersey for a fourth and a seventh going to Winnipeg. February 26, 2013, Simon Gagne goes back to Philadelphia for a conditional fourth going to the LA Kings. February 26, 2013, Eric Cole goes to Dallas for Michael Ryder and a third going to Montreal. March 25th, 2013, Brendan Morrow and a conditional third go to Pittsburgh for Joe Morrow, same last name, and a fifth-round pick going to Dallas. And Pittsburgh's not done because March 25th as well, they get Douglas Murray from San Jose for a second and a conditional second. And San Jose's in a playoff spot, yet they're selling off a lot of pieces you'll see here. Jerome McGinley is added then on March 28th to Pittsburgh. There was a very big thing at the time whether he goes to Pittsburgh or Boston. It was said that he was going to Boston, and then at the 11th hour he goes to Pittsburgh. And I liked McGinley at the time, and honestly I'd rather see him in Pittsburgh uniform than Boston, so I was fine with it. For Pittsburgh, so Augustino, Hanowski, and a first go to Calgary the other way. A little bit of an underpayment, I'd say, for what Ginla brought. April 1st, 2013, Michael Hanzus goes to Chicago for a fourth-round pick. He played second-line center for 2 years. Great move by Stan Bowman there. April 1st, 2013, Robin Regier to LA for 2 seconds to go into Buffalo. April 1st, 2013, Jay Bouwmeester goes to St. Louis and Calgary's fire sale for Kundari, Rito Berra, a conditional first, and a conditional fourth going to Calgary. Derek Roy goes to Vancouver for Connaughton and a second going to Dallas. And what's interesting about that is Roy was acquired from Buffalo for Steve Ott and Adam Party earlier in the summer. April 2nd, 2013, Yager goes to Boston for not Ian McDermott, Payne, and a conditional first or second going back to Dallas. Ryan Clough then goes to the New York Rangers for a second, a third, and a conditional second going to the Sharks. So Sharks getting value for players they either don't necessarily need or they were not in the and they didn't think they were going to make the playoffs and were just selling. I mean, they were 2 points out of a playoff spot. Coyotes win a game or Columbus gets another point, and yeah, the San Jose was very close to being out of the playoffs. Now that I look at it, April 3rd, 2013. April 3rd, 2013. Hannon then goes to San Jose for a conditional sixth or seventh going to Nashville. April 3rd, 2013, UC Jokinen goes to Pittsburgh for a conditional seventh going to Carolina. April 3rd, 2013, this is the trade deadline. Ben Bishop goes to Tampa Bay for Conacher and a fourth going to Ottawa. Ottawa, you have been robbed. April 3rd, 2013, this time Steve Mason goes to Philadelphia for Michael Layden and a third going to Columbus. Michael Layden, his story didn't last long. He's the hero in 2010 that brings the Flyers to the final. 2011, he's not even there anymore. Boucher is the starter. Layden might have been the backup, but by 2012, he's out of the picture. It's Brizgalov in net. And then by 2013, he's traded. Then we have another big trade on April 3rd, 2013. Marian Gaborik, Steve Delisle, and Parlett go to Columbus for Derek Brassard, Derek Dorsett, John Moore, and a sixth going to the Rangers. April 3rd, 2013, Pominville and a fourth go to Minnesota for, I believe that says Hackett, Johan Larsson, who just left the NHL, and a first and a second going to Buffalo. April 3rd, 2013, Rafi Torres goes to San Jose for a third, and I only mention that because he tried to murder several people there, including Jakob Silfverberg. April 3rd, 2013, Wade Redding goes to Boston for a conditional 7th. April 3rd, 2013, Steve Sullivan goes to Phoenix for a 7th. And this is what I was confused about. Why are teams that are out of the playoffs trading picks for players they really don't need? Like, you got New Jersey down here, and then you got Phoenix. I mean, they're close to being in the playoffs, so I guess that's a buyer's move to get in. But like Atlanta or Winnipeg and New Jersey trading Ponikarovsky, it really doesn't make much sense there. But yeah. And then April 3rd, 2013, the final trade on this board, a very big regret by the Washington Capitals. Martin Erat, Michael Latta to the Washington Capitals for Philip Forsberg going the other way to Nashville. A historically bad trade right there. And that's going to be it for you guys. I'm going to thank you all so much for watching this video. Tell me down below what you remember about the 2012-13 lockout season. At least we had a season, 48-game schedule, and I forgot to mention all the play was interconference. So you only played the Western teams in the playoffs, and Eastern teams only played the Eastern teams in the playoffs. The only Western and Eastern teams that played each other were Chicago and Boston that season in the final. So I want to thank you all so much for watching once again. Please leave anything you have to say down in the comments below, and I shall see you all in the next one. Have a good one.